Let me ask you a question. When I say the name Nuremberg, what pops up in your head? Is it the Nazi Party rally grounds and the spectacle that they had behind the city? Or is it the trials that took place after the war where they tried the Nazi criminals? But one thing that probably doesn't pop up in your mind is the word resistance. And that's what I'm going to cover today. What did resistance look like in the city of Nuremberg during the Nazi regime? Together with Dr. Bernhard Lübbers, a German historian, we're going to uncover some of the stories of resistance that happened in this city and try to figure out what it looked like. So stay around to the end of the video and you'll find out what resistance in Nuremberg really meant. Now, there never was one unified German resistance movement during the Nazi regime, but there were scattered efforts spread between personal, religious, and political lines. People did resist. Not everyone submitted.
When the Nazis came to power in January 1933, they really quickly started to get rid of all their political opponents. They spread out terror, massive terror against first the political opponents, as I said, the communists, the socialists, and then very quickly against the Jews, and it became harder and harder to resist the regime.
Situations like this and the terrorism that they use against their own people made resistance almost impossible, an idea that you didn't even want to think about, and it was done like this by design.
It was hard to practice resistance, but there were some people, they did, for example, the student Sophie Scholl, Hans Scholl, her brother, or Helmut James Graf Moltke, or pretty famous Klaus Graf von Stauffenberg, military resistance. So there were single examples, but there were really rare exceptions.
Nuremberg was supposed to be one of the grand Germanic cities of the Nazi regime. They had plans here to build up enormous structures to make this Germania perfecto. That's why here in Nuremberg, resistance would have been extra futile and difficult because of the extra surveillance of the Gestapo, because of the status it had. It would look really bad for the Nazi propaganda if there was resistance here in their future perfecto Germania city.
It was really hard to resist because of the terror from Gestapo and SS. And especially here in Nuremberg, it was the city of the Reichsparteitage.
But there were some who resisted. The people who stood and risked their lives here in Nuremberg alone, whether it be political or for personal reasons, still offered some resistance, and their story deserves to be remembered. One of the first stories I want to talk about is Kunigunde Schumann-Schwab. She was a known communist and a KPD activist, and after the party was banned in 1933, she started working underground, producing newspapers of anti-propaganda for the Communist Party. In August of 1933, she was arrested and held prisoner by the Gestapo. She's one of those examples of early resistance here in the city of Nuremberg. And later on, she even served, after the war, surviving it, on the city council here in Nuremberg. Working alongside the network of Kunigunde Schumann-Schwab was also Ludwig Göhring. Ludwig Göhring was also a member of the KPD, the Kommunistische Partei Deutschland, the Communist Party of Germany. His job was distributing the leaflets. It was part of that network trying to get the message out of resistance. He, however, was captured by the Gestapo in 1933 and brutally interrogated. Through his interrogation and torture, he exposed the network that led to many resists, including that of Kunigunde Schumann-Schwab.
Okay, I want to tell the story about Maria Haag. She was a normal German. Back in those days, it was called Arierin, Aryan woman, a normal German lady. And she worked for a Jewish man. And in November 1938, the SR stormed in their flat, and they hit her so hard that she died afterwards. She was not Jewish. To mention it again, she lived here on that very spot, as you can see here. And nowadays, a stepstone reminds her, and you can read that she was treated by the SA in November 1938 and died a few weeks later. The SA was, it's the German word for SA is Sturmabteilung, storm kind of troopers. It was the formation of the Nazi Party in the 20s. They did terror to the opponents of the Nazi Party, and it lasted until the end, until 1945. And the SS was originally a part of the SA, but later on it became an own formation, and it was more powerful, the SS, of course, but the SA was at the beginnings of the regime the most powerful part of the Nazi Party.
Another early resistance victim of the SA and the Nazi regime was that of Oskar Pflaumer, likely also a member of the KPD, but I haven't been able to confirm that. What I could confirm is that in 1933, under abuse and torture from the SA, the Sturmabteilung, which, as Dr. Lübbers mentioned, was the terror arm of the Nazis, especially in the early days, he succumbed to this Nazi terror and unfortunately died. He's remembered as an early resistance fighter against the Nazi regime. Oskar Pflaumer was his name. The example of how German resistance looked like. It wasn't some big heroic protest or overthrowing the government. It was the small acts, doing what they could, producing papers, producing leaflets, telling the people walking on the street, whoever they could, to resist the regime, to get the idea. Because you have to remember, the Nazis were very good at one thing, and that's propaganda. They could drill it into your head that you're on the right side of history, and nobody thinks that they're on the wrong side. So with this propaganda, they were able to fuel their hate and their ambitious, crazy ideas. But it's people like Kunigunde Schumann-Schwab who were so crucial in planting the idea of resistance. Some of the stories that we've covered so far cover resistance in the early years of the Nazi regime. But what about those who resisted later on? What about those religious leaders who tried to resist? Well, let's go look at one of those stories. The next story of resistance I want to talk about is that of Friedrich von Praun. He was a Protestant church official, and in 1932 he gave a speech against the Nazi Party, foreshadowing the absurdness that would come into the future. Well, in 1944, for those words he said in 1932, he was arrested. The cause, saying defeatist statements and lowering the morale of the Volk, as they would say it. His cause of death is unknown. What I do know is that he died while in Nazi custody in 1944, probably most likely under torture. And he is originally not from Nuremberg. He's from a local town of Ansbach, not far away. However, he was brought after his arrest here and tortured here in Nuremberg. And that brings his connection of resistance in the city of Nuremberg.
Friedrich von Praun is a good example for the religious resistance against the Nazi Party. And like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, we do a video about him later. He died in Flossenbürg concentration camp in the Upper Palatinate, Oberpfalz. And yeah, he was also from the Evangelische Kirche, evangelical church here in Germany, and brought to death by the Nazis. And one more example for religious resistance against the Nazis would be Dr. Johann Meyer in Regensburg. We did a video about him. Check it out in the links.
So those are just some examples of a personal, a religious, and a political resistance story against the Nazi regime, here or connected to the city of Nuremberg. Why was Nuremberg so important to the Nazi regime to begin with? Well, to answer this question, you want to date back to the medieval ages, the Holy Roman Empire here of German nations. Nuremberg served this purpose as being an imperial free city, therefore gaining its reputation of being what it was. The Nazis romanticized history. They wanted to rebuild the history in their own image to use it for their propaganda. That's what made Nuremberg so important. What is Nuremberg today? Today, Nuremberg is a city that has vibrant culture, rich in history, but also dealing with its dark past. The resistance in Nuremberg wasn't classified by a giant act or by big heroes, big names. It's about individual stories who, even in the face of Nazi terror, still resisted where they could. Whether it be the political part, sharing the pamphlets, offering the words of resistance, whether it be the religious part, giving speeches of defiance against the Nazi regime even before they came to power, or it be the personal story. All these stories we talked about today are individual stories who offered their own individual resistance, whether it be in different ways. They still did what they could, and their stories deserve to be remembered.
German resistance is a topic people don't very often talk about. What we can learn today is resistance is always possible against every regime, against every dictatorship. And I want to challenge you. Write in the commentaries what stories about resistance you know. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
If you thought today's stories were interesting and would like to learn more about them, I'll post the literature of what I used and my sources in the description. Please review them and learn something about these names, about these people and their stories, and about German resistance, because even though it wasn't widespread, it existed. If you felt that you learned something today with Dr. Lübbers and myself, please stay around, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. And until then, I say thank you for watching.